People will talk. So, welcome to the People Will Talk podcast. Joining us is Anita Haas. It's our pleasure to invite her. She's a Canadian writer and an English teacher who's based here in Spain, who does also work with educational centres. And she publishes both in English and Spanish. Myself and Maria have had the pleasure of reading some of her stories, which we'll talk about, of course, over the course of this interview. And she has published non-fiction and fiction books. And her latest release is a picture book, Chato the Puppy Cats, or Chato el Perro Gato in Spanish also. So welcome, Anita. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. It's really exciting.
It's a pleasure having you here. And there's so much we can talk to you about, so much to get to grips with, because you've done so many amazing things. And we mentioned in the introduction that you publish in Spanish and English, and you write in different languages. So I'm just wondering, for example, the story Birthmark, which I really loved as well, it's written in English, yet there's also many words in Spanish. And I is this a curiosity of mine? The story sounds, I guess, more authentic, when we have these Spanish words in the Spanish-centered story, even though we're writing principally in English. And I just wonder, given your different languages and your international background, do these things influence how you approach your writing?
Well, that's a good question. I think maybe it doesn't exactly influence the way I write, but maybe what I write about, if that makes sense. I think a lot of my characters and my stories are people who are from different cultures. And so it's just natural for them to add in, to pepper the stories with different language. It's true that it makes, I think, the story sound a little bit more authentic. And also, after living in Spain for so many years, I'm sure that maybe you've experienced this as well. A lot of my English-speaking friends who live here have the same experience, that you're speaking English even to another English speaker who lives here, and we often use Spanish words just because there isn't the an English equivalent that seemed right or perfect in that moment, or even the other way around. With my husband, I speak in Spanish all the time, but there are words that both of us use in English, that just doesn't, it doesn't make sense in a way, but I suppose that's just our brain saying this word in this language is more appropriate than this other word in this other language. But also, too, I think getting back to the characters, I think a lot of the characters in my stories are, living in different environments, coming from different places, moving to different places, which it seems to be kind of a theme that runs through some of my stories.
That's quite interesting, of course, for us, anything that mixes Spanish and English, because we also like constantly, and it's true that when you're speaking certain words, it just come more easily, or even you use them as jokes or things. No?
Yes.
So they become part of like the normal conversation, and so that's to mix them. But I mean, you've won a lot of awards. You've written lots of different things, and different genres. So do you have a favorite one that you enjoy writing the most? For example, you do a lot of stories. You do some poetry too. What's your favorite thing to write, if any?
I think that I've written nonfiction and fiction and poetry, basically. And I've never tried a novel yet, but I've done a lot of short stories. And I think that for me, that is really my favorite genre, even to read. I mean, I love short stories. And there's just something about a short story that it's concise, it gets to the point, it has something really specific to say, so it just it gets right to the point, and that's what I love about short stories. I think the difference between fiction and nonfiction is that nonfiction maybe kind of calls to the teacher side of me, because sometimes when I learn something new, like about flamenco or about, I don't know, about some historical place, I get really excited. And the first thing I want to do is tell people about it. I want to share this information. And so something I always did as well in my classes. And so that's when I like to write about it, either articles like I used to write in magazines and newspapers here in Madrid, or in books, most of which I've written together with my husband. So I get really excited about sharing something that I've discovered outside of myself, whereas fiction is more something that you discover, I think, inside yourself. You know, that a lot of fiction stories can somehow reflect the feelings of the author, and then you share them with the world. And in a way, they're much more intimate, aren't they? Because if you share something that you've written and people reject it, they're kind of rejecting you, aren't they, in a way? Whereas if you're writing about something that's separate from yourself, you know, that's just a separate thing. I mean, people can like it or not, but it's more based on the theme, whereas fiction is much more personal, I believe. And so in that sense, it's much more of a reflection or an expression of myself. So I would feel that that's more my favorite, I suppose you could say.
And we mentioned as well, Anita, that we've read some of your stories that you were so kind to share with us as well before the interview. And so there's a few we can mention. The Viaduct of Madrid, I think, is a beautiful piece of writing, because when we think of Madrid, and like any city, you know, you think of the major landmarks. It could be the Eiffel Tower in Paris, or in Madrid, the Bear in Seoul. But you're writing about something that is very llamativo in Spanish, we would say. It's very
See, you're doing the same thing that I do. You're like my characters.
Yes, once you live in a country, it's just, you know, for everybody back home, you sound pretentious when you start using Spanish, but they don't understand.
Right.
You just can't help it. But what I love about this is it's like the Viaduct is like, it's this huge thing, right? It's in this neighborhood. It's so beautiful, but people who aren't maybe from that barrio wouldn't maybe know it exists. So you're finding the beauty in this thing that is beautiful, but it's just unknown. I think it's so amazing. And then in Cool Dudes and Santas, you know, because myself and Maria have experience in ESL writing as well. And so it's combining your experiences of that and also themes of visual impairment as well. So it's such a profound piece of work as well. And in Cool Dudes and Santas as well, I think there's a little bit of an element as well, because, you know, maybe English teachers who are from England might have a bit of a superiority complex over non-English teachers, right? So that would extend to North Americans and also to Irish people teaching English as well, I think. So, you know, there's so many elements here that are so interesting. And I know, Maria, as well, that you have some comments about this also, don't you? Some stories that you've read and things that you really liked, no?
Yes. Well, I think you touched on it as well, but I think that very personal, you know, combination of memories and also like a bit of stream of consciousness, because sometimes when you are you know, it's what happens when you are walking around places. We talk about this a lot. You know, they remind you of what you've said in that specific place, or what has happened in that place. And then when I was reading one of your stories, it was a bit like that. It was like, you know, thinking of the past and reflecting on how those characters felt back then, and then how they feel now, and as they were walking around. And I really like the fact that you put so many details about Madrid, you know, in your writing, because as I read, I'm imagining, you know, walking around there. and how it makes you feel. And sometimes when there's a feeling that is similar to what the character is describing, is quite nice. No? That happened with the viaduct, and it's a very evoking place as well.
Yes, well, for me, Madrid. Sorry. For me, Madrid is, I love Madrid. I'm so grateful to Madrid for having adopted me, and I just can't stop finding amazing things to write about in Madrid. I just love it. So there even, just the other day, a story came out in an American magazine called Falling Star, and it's called Matchmakers, and it's all about, well, I have several stories with this couple. She's Canadian, he's Spanish, so they're kind of based on my husband and me. But anyway, she's got a new colleague, and they're walking around Madrid, and all these different things that happen. But including all the different, many different landmarks, and I like doing that a lot in stories, if I can, obviously, if the story calls for it. I do love including as much as I can in Madrid. I have another story that should be coming out soon called The Queen's Nightmare, and it's about a tour guide who is also an English teacher, and she has a very interesting relationship with different areas of the city and historical figures of the city. So it's a very interesting. I find it a really interesting sort of relationship that I have with the city, with the historical characters, with the monuments, with places. There are so many things, like you said, Maria, when you walk around and you feel like this happened to me here or that happened to me. Sometimes you have maybe a bad memory, and you're just, as you're walking by, you feel something, you think, ugh, why do I feel this way? And you remember, that happened, or you have a happy feeling, and then you remember. I think we have a real, almost a physical relationship with the cities we live in.
So would you say, Anita, that this is the major theme of your work, or is just one of many themes? How would you sum up the work that you do? What are the major things that you touch on when you are writing these stories?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yes, definitely. I like to include that. I think I like to talk about relationships a lot, but I suppose that's a very common theme in most people's writing. But I think I like to write about people. There's a lot of migration as well. I've always been fascinated with migration because my family are immigrants to Canada from Europe, and so they had a very interesting immigration story. And I also, having worked as an English teacher, and you probably have experienced this as well, is that English teachers in Madrid, there are so many that really have quite interesting stories, because they are often very, very multifaceted. They'll have, you'll meet somebody who's an English teacher, but also an actor, or an English teacher, but also a musician, an English teacher, but also a writer. And there are a lot of people who I find that they're searching for something, and they're also maybe running from something. And these are kind of the kind of characters I like to write about, because they're, they maybe never fit in very well. You know how there are a lot of people who just maybe didn't feel like they fit in very well where they came from, and so they're searching for a place. And I think for me, really a little bit like that as well. I didn't fit in very well in where I came from for several reasons. And I think that Madrid really, for me, is the place that I feel very happy here. It's a very welcoming city. And so a lot of my characters are like that. It's migration, people searching, people running from things, and the relationships and the people that they meet along the way.
That you're touching on a lot of interesting things, especially for for people that we have opposite experiences, I guess, but it's interesting to see, I lived in Madrid, and then I went away, then I came back, and and of course you have this opposite experience, or Anita has as well. So that's all very enriching. But what really strikes me as well is that you're able to write all that, but also your latest release is a picture book, which seems quite a different thing. Also, like for children. I'm also impressed by the fact that you've managed to make the poem in both languages, because I like the idea of the poppy cat and the also the gato
Perigato, yeah.
Perigato, yes. Which is nice. But what was it like? Can you tell us a little bit about what was it like for you writing that picture book? How it differs from the other things that you do.
Well, this was a very long journey. It started, I think, I would say almost 2 decades ago. So it was just one of those things that, you're running for the bus or for the metro, going to class as always, and I had this little rhyme sort of appear in my head about the first 2 verses. And I remember thinking, as usual, like, okay, yeah, all right, I don't have time right now. I'm late for class. I'm busy. But it's like this little rhyme didn't want to forget me, so it just kept kind of bothering me over time. So I wrote it down, and I thought, okay, well, I'll deal with you when I have time. And then a while later, I kind of looked through my journal notes, and I saw it, and I thought, this is a story about a little old lady who would like to have a cat, well, very much so, and a little dog who needs a home. And then it just kind of stopped there. And I thought, I wonder what's going to happen to that little old lady and that dog. And I realized the only way that I was going to find out was to write the story. So it was kind of one of those magical experiences that does not happen very often, but I kind of sat down and I ended up writing just 3 pages of rhymed verse, which of course afterwards I did have to go back and correct and change and that, but it was pretty much a finished product when it came out. And I was, it was quite magical experience for me. But then again, it just stayed there. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have any contacts or connections or anything about how to publish a children's book. I mean, it's difficult publishing for adults, but I eventually found out that it's much more difficult publishing for children, because it's like an industry. It's amazing how complicated it is. But I did end up using it, in some classes when I went to the children's classes, or in the library that used to be where I work. And eventually it did get accepted in the United States to one of the place that had published my first novelettes. And they were working on it, and they had also accepted another children's book that came up. But they ended up closing. So it just seemed like it was a long, really arduous journey. I didn't know what to do with this story, but I knew that someday I wanted to do something with it. So it wasn't until COVID that I decided, look, I'm going to do this. And I thought, well, if I want to publish this in Spain, I'll have to write a Spanish version as well. And it was a real challenge for me, but it was really an interesting challenge, I think, mentally, because to write rhymed verse in English is challenging, but for an English speaker to write rhymed verse in Spanish, it's a lot more challenging. But it was quite an interesting project. It was during, lockdown. We were all, couldn't go anywhere. So I thought, okay, this is going to be my project. So, I worked away on it. And I'm proud to say that I did it, mostly myself. I show my husband, does this work out? Or my sister-in-law, does this sound okay? Yeah, whatever. Or they would, maybe say, actually, this verb is reflexive, remember, or something like that. They would correct little things. But for the most part, I did it myself. And then I also decided to do the drawings. So then when it finally came out, it was like, oh, it was a huge relief. It finally exists, and it's my baby, and I love it.
That's impressive.
You mentioned such an interesting process, right? So you're figuring out how to say certain things in Spanish, and it's always a journey, but a very fulfilling one as well. And I love your earlier answer as well for Maria, where you talk about ESL teachers, people who come here. Some of us are the damned. We're running away from something. It's a very alluring image of the kind of ESL teacher abroad. But one thing about your book, however, this new picture book, of course, since we mentioned earlier some of your themes of travel and people and history, the theme here very much, I guess, would be animal rights. So this is another string to your bow, another facet to who you are as well. So how did you, or when did you start becoming so interested in animal rights and things like this?
Oh, can I just circle back to one thing that we said before? The theme of this book, it does touch on animal rights in a way, but I would say that probably the main theme for this book is acceptance and tolerance, because the story is about a dog who has to behave like a cat to be accepted by the lady who adopts him. And so basically that's the whole conflict throughout the story. And so I'm not going to tell you the end, but but especially when I've taken this book to schools or to libraries, and this is always the theme that comes up afterwards, like, do you ever feel this way? Do you ever feel like you don't fit in? So I think in that way, the book does connect a little bit more with what I said before about people who are, relationships, people looking, searching, trying to find themselves in different places. And in this case, it's a puppy dog. But yes, exactly. Getting to animal rights, again, it's about a homeless dog who's looking for a home. And that is, yes, a definite other theme that I'm very passionate about. Well, I think I've always loved animals, especially cats. I've never had a dog, so it's not something that I can really talk about. However, like often when we're walking in the streets, my husband and I, and we see people walking their dogs, and I always say, "Oh, it's so cute! Look at that cute little dog! Don't you want one?" And he'll remind me that you have to take them out, 3 times a day, and so cats are much easier to look after. But yes, I've always loved cats, and living here in Madrid too. I have several friends, and I know how much time they dedicate. I just admire them so much. I have one friend who has a regular job, she's an office job, but she gets up at 5 a.m, goes to the different to different places, what do we call them, empty lots and places where, stray cats live, the little communities, and she gives them their food. Sometimes they have to capture them, and that's a whole, dramatic process as well, having to try and capture cats. Or oftentimes they have confrontations with people who try to injure the cats or poison them or things like that. And so they have, stories that, it's amazing. And people will call them, in the middle of the night, "Oh, there's a cat, stuck on the roof," or something like that. And they drop everything and run to rescue these cats. And I just find that amazing. So, I can't really, be like them in the sense that to physically go out and rescue cats, but I've always tried to donate money every year, especially in the springtime when there are all these litters, and I donate money. And so when this book came out, I thought, had this idea, and I discussed it with a friend of mine who also in a small town who also works in a cat rescue organization. I said, "What do you think if what I did was I published this book, and I would kind of collaborate with cat rescue organizations, and they would have presentations. We'd present the book, and then all the proceeds would go to that organization. And she said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I could see that this was a way the book would reach more homes. So it was kind of, I think, a unique experience. And so since then, I've been working with a lot of different animal rescue organizations and met some very interesting people, and just amazed at the work they do.
That's incredible. But the thing that I think is so valuable, that this story has those two sides, doesn't it? So you can look at it from that human point of view you were talking about, but then it's also so valuable to point out, about animals and all this work that these rescue places do. So I wanted to ask you about that, because we have listeners all over the world. I'm sure in different countries, this process is different. But what's it like in Spain to rescue a cat? Is it an easy process to adopt an animal? Do you find it, I don't know, these organizations really want to encourage people to cooperate, or there's always like the reputation that we have so much paperwork? So how can you tell us a little bit about the process?
Well, since we kind of had some friends who were involved in it, but we still did have to do the paperwork. Yes, it was with our rescue cats. Basically what you can do is look for associations. In Madrid, for example, there are, I think, dozens. I mean, there are so many. There are big ones and small ones, but they all have their website. You can go on, and they have pictures of the animals and maybe little backstories, sometimes tragic backstories. So that can be also a bit traumatizing. And you can then contact them, and then what they will do is they will either they'll take you to see the animal. Either they can be in shelters or they might be in foster homes. And our cats were in foster homes, both of them. So we went to see them, talk to the people. Then the people who run the organization will come to your home and see if it's a suitable home. So, for example, they would. We live on the second floor, so we needed to get screens on our windows, because there are so many cases of cats falling out of windows, and either they get lost or they get injured, and so we no problem. Yeah, we got screens on our windows, and that was no problem. So we were accepted, and then they do try to kind of keep a little bit. They follow up, a few times to see if everything's okay, and that's great. That's how we had to sign a contract too, and then pay, of course, because what they do is neuter the animal if it's not neutered yet, and give it their shots and everything else. So, I mean, the money that you pay is not that much, and it's also, that it's for a good cause, and also because they give you the animal without any diseases, and just prepared to be your pet. So you don't have to do anything about it afterwards.
Yeah, of course. It makes perfect sense. So that's it's great to be able to cooperate like that. Another thing that blows me away about your book is that you haven't just written it, you've illustrated it as well. And this is like, so it is so difficult to have the skill to do both things, both writing and illustrating. And I find it certainly, for example, in my case, that like one thing is the character or the thing that you have in your head, in your imagination, but then when it actually comes to drawing it, it might seem something completely different too. So how easy do you find, to draw those characters that you have in your imagination? And is it something that you would like to keep doing maybe in the future after this experience?
Yes. Well, I've always loved to draw, even as a little kid. I was always drawing pictures. And it was something that, I wanted to do as growing up. But there was one thing that kind of held me a little bit back, and that was my vision disability. One thing that is kind of unique about my vision impairment is that I don't see color. So when I was, kind of talking about, that's maybe illustrating the book, and, people would say, oh, but, children's books, they have to be colorful. They have to have lots of color. You can see, children need to have lots of color. And I've never seen color, so I don't know what it's like and what to see it and why it's so necessary. But so when it was going to be published in the States, the designer, the publisher's designer, did some illustrations, and they were very nice. They were color illustrations, but then the company closed in COVID because of health problems, and so that's when I found myself kind of like, what do I do now? I'm like, trying to get this book published for 15 years, and finally, I found a publisher who wanted it. So that's when I thought, well, you know what, if I'm here doing the Spanish version, why don't I just sit down and try to draw pictures? I had drawn pictures before, but kind of more rudimentary ones that I used when I was using the manuscript in classes. But this time I thought, well, I'll sit down and I'll draw them pencil sketches, and it seemed almost a little bit magical, just like the story itself. But I'm pretty happy with them. I didn't think that they would turn out so well. Basically, I was quite happy, and they just kind of came out the way they did, and that's exactly how I saw the puppy and how I saw the lady. And yes, I've just finished another children's book as well. This is another story that I'd written years ago, and also that same publisher in the States that closed had accepted that story as well. But so after the puppy cat came out, and I thought, well, why don't I sit down and do the pencil sketches for this next book as well? So this is now finished. It's also, I'm finishing up the Spanish translation, and it's called We're Late, and it's about five kitties who have a dinner date and they're late for the dinner date. And it's basically to teaching children how to tell time. So it's all about, arriving late and what time it is, and kind of that pressure about having to arrive. But, so it's kind of a really fun experience.
Sounds it.
You mentioned in that interview something that you touched on in your answer to Maria, Being All of Us, I believe it's called, which was a great episode. I really enjoyed your interview with the host, so a big shout out to him as well for doing that, about being visually impaired. And as I mentioned to you before, I have taught English with La Once, which I still do actually, which for people who don't know is an organization in Spain that looks after people or helps people with visual impairments things. And they're a wonderful organization. They were one of the first, if not the first, in Europe to do this. And now it's a major organization, and they have a big Christmas lottery every year as well. And they're quite good at what they do. But I have to admit, when I first started teaching there, I was, I guess, surprised by the range of what being visually impaired means. When before working in Unsafe, I probably had this very false belief, well, either you can see or you can't, but there's a whole range of things. So I was ignorant about this, and by working with Unsafe, I got to learn a lot more about these issues. So do you think that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what being visually impaired means in the modern world?
Yes. really, my own experience has been, quite basically kind of hiding it most of my life. And so basically now is when I'm starting to talk about it. So, and I think that writing these two stories about this teacher, Tom, in Life After Dark and Cool Dudes and Santas, is when really I had to kind of sit down and look over kind of my life and look over the different incidents and what did they mean, because I don't know, sometimes you have a tendency, if you have some kind of problem that just doesn't seem to be a solution, you just kind of deal with it. You just kind of go forward. You invent your strategies, how to get around it. You just go forward, and you don't even think about it that much. But it can be frustrating because then you get into situations where you might look kind of stupid or something. People think that about you because they don't realize, of course, that you just can't see. So I really had to. It was kind of soul searching to write those two stories, and I thought I'd put them into an English teacher in Madrid as well, because as I said before, a lot of English teachers really do have some backstories that can be quite interesting and different reasons of why they go abroad and look for new places and new situations and to start over, and they have an interesting background. But I'm interested, when you said that you did work with people and that a lot of times they feel frustrated. I'd like to know a little bit about what are some of their comments, what are some of their observations about their frustration.
Well, it's an interesting question. It's not that they would say anything directly, but just navigating the challenges of teaching a class like that. So it takes a little bit more preparation, which for me it's not that much of a hassle, but everything has to be kind of converted to a Word document and then sending it to the particular student. And again, depending on what their particular situation is, the class will go along those lines also. No, so they will have equipment that will help them do their work, because of course these are people, because ONSE helps, visually impaired people work in offices, and people working there, a lot of them are visually impaired as well. So it's all about getting people involved in society and having fulfilling careers as well. But for example, maybe somebody who's completely blind could have a little bar on their computer, which means that it will read the text for them and then reproduce it as audio, for example. That's one particular thing. But sometimes that doesn't work, or it's malfunctioning as technologies want to do, for example. So nothing's explicitly said. Sometimes it's just a frustration because something that's designed to help them isn't working, or there's an extra barrier or challenge put there for them, that just makes whatever it could be, sending an email, maybe opening an audio that I've sent, because of course we're doing classes online now, so I'm not there in person to play it myself. So these are things that just make, things that most people probably take for granted, just that little bit harder.
Yeah.
And sometimes the frustration is obvious because of that,
That's right. Yeah. That's very interesting because, like you said, it's like day-to-day things like that most people take for granted. Exactly. And but curiously, your students are in an environment where that's maybe a little bit more understood. But in most of my experience was just kind of like running a class or being a student or being the teacher of a class where nobody knows that this is my problem. So when I was running into these the screens are unplugged, or there's a tiny little microscopic thing on the screen that I'm supposed, I couldn't see the screens or the boards or anything, and try to run a class, especially when you're in the university where you have 40 18-year-olds, and it can be really stressful and really sometimes frustrating when technology doesn't work or things like that. So you do a lot of faking, you do a lot of memorizing, a lot of plan B and plan C. So yeah, it's and I think tried to reflect that in the stories that I wrote. So I think it is interesting. I don't know if anybody, my condition is called achromatopsia. I don't know if anybody with achromatopsia has ever written about their experiences. So it might be one of the first examples. So yeah, so achromatopsia is basically no color vision and extreme a sensitivity to light, photophobia, which means I wear sunglasses almost all the time. I didn't always wear sunglasses indoors just so that I wasn't, calling attention to myself. But I realized that that's kind of silly because in the end I was squinting all the time and kind of suffering because, especially with fluorescent lights or windows. So now I wear sunglasses all the time. So.
I think what you just explained, I think is so interesting because there's so much, nuance. There are so many different experiences, and I think it's very valuable to have, your own experience explained. In Life After Dark, the character really gives you an insight on what is like to see in that particular way, which is also very interesting creatively, isn't it? So that's but you haven't just written things on your own. You've also written them with your husband.
Yes.
We've written books together as well, and we also translate each other as you do. So can you tell us a bit about what your experience is of working with somebody else, in this case with your husband?
Well, my husband is excuse me. His name is Carlos Aguilar, and he's been publishing for almost 40 years. So he's quite well known in his field of cinema, and so he has a lot more experience than I do, and so basically he's a little bit like a mentor to me. And really, he's been so supportive over the years. And really, I think publishing, I started, when I got together with him, and not just through contacts that he had, but just him pushing me to contact people and to go for it. Because I think before that, I just thought, who am I? The typical like. He was always been very supportive, and he's always liked to include me wherever he can in projects, especially projects that we're both passionate about, like for example, our flamenco books and flamenco cine, which was in fact, I think it was my idea, but my idea for him to write. I said, why don't you write a book about flamenco cine? Because we were getting so excited about flamenco, and we were always going to flamenco shows. We were getting to know people. We both just loved it. We were buying albums, and I was getting really hooked on YouTube. I was watching YouTube videos of flamenco all the time. I was getting obsessed with flamenco, and I said, why don't you, you're the expert on cinema, why don't you write a book on flamenco and cinema? And he said, okay, but with you. And so I was like, wow. But I felt really honored to be, included in that. And so in the end, we did that together. Now, of course, the final writing, I don't, write very well in Spanish, especially not very long pieces. I will write short pieces or poems or things for children, or flash fiction or things I've written in Spanish. But Spanish is a very different language than English, and so it's he does the final draft. I might write out my kind of Spanish, but then he will do the final version of the writing.
And
I'm sorry, the translation I didn't talk about the translate. We do translate each other. We do translate each other, but it is that's an interesting process. Several years ago, I had a book of shorts published in English in magazines in the States. And so Carlos translated the stories, but it was funny because there were times when we did have a few spats, because he would sometimes add something in, and I would say, what's that doing in there? Get that out of there. I didn't write that. So it would be, we have our fun times. Sometimes we even argue a bit. No, I didn't say that. That's not what I meant. Or, I think being so close, it helps because you can, really ask each other, what exactly did you mean? And this and that, if I use this expression, is that, or maybe another expression, what do you think is better? Whereas if somebody you don't know translates for you, you're not sure exactly how it, you don't participate in the process if it's clear.
Well, translation is such a beguiling art form as well. We've touched on this on previous episodes as well, because in some senses it can be almost like a new act of creation as well. But
Yes.
I think you're right though, that benefit of having somebody that you're close to bounce off ideas and work so closely together, it stands to the text really, because, well, since you live together, it's like, well, you can ask that question more easily than, if it's somebody who's in another country, possibly, who's doing the translation, so, but ultimately a very enriching collaboration, I'm sure. So now, speaking of all these wonderful stories, we've touched on your wonderful stories and your writing, and I believe you are going to read something for us now at the end of the podcast, no?
Oh, okay, yes. Well, no, I'll start with the picture book. I'll just read a few pages.
Sure.
A few pages. So, okay, there on the first page, there's this lady called Susie van Hoosen, and she's thinking about a cat. So it starts off with, Susie van Hoosen longed for a cat. It should be fluffy and furry and fat. It would be happy and always at play. So imagine her pleasure one cold winter day, when a soft sound of scratching was heard at her door, and before it was standing a cat on all fours, covered in fur that was curly and dark. It looked at her happily and started to bark. So I'll leave it there. Those were the verses that came to me. Those were the verses that came to me years ago, and kept bothering me. And when that I kept looking at and thinking, what's going to happen? This is obviously a conflict here. A cat does not bark. What's happening? So that's where the springboard was that I wrote the rest of the story.
Wonderful, very charming. Actually, before Christmas, and since they're only over 1 year old, my two nieces, I'm going to get them this book before I go back as well for Christmas. So they won't listen to the podcast because they're so young, but
Right.
so there's no spoilers for them. But I think they'll really enjoy this story. It's I really enjoyed the little fragment that you so kindly read for us.
Yeah, it's quite exciting because now everybody's wondering what happens next. So go and buy the book to find out what happens after the bark.
That's right. Well, I'm reading in libraries and schools as well. Tomorrow I have this event in the library Iván de Vargas, which is right next to Plaza Mayor. So, and it's also in English this time. Normally they're in Spanish. So I'm quite excited about that. But I know that this podcast won't be out before tomorrow, so people won't hear about it. But yes, there will be other opportunities to hear it. If you'd like me to read the poem, I don't know. Do we have time? Or
definitely, yeah, sure. Let's do it.
This is a poem that I wrote. Well, actually, let me see. Why don't I read? Okay, yeah, this is a poem that this one's called New Life. And I'm reading this one because this is one of them that I translated into Spanish, and it actually won an award. It has a little story around it. It's a kind of an idea that had occurred to me years ago about transplants. I know that sounds like a very strange thing to interest people, but it always occurred to me that it was very interesting how parts of your body could live on could live on longer after you die, in somebody else's body, and how interesting that was, and how beautiful that is, that somebody else could take a part of your body and carry it on forever, and you don't know where that part of your body is going to be. And about 7 years ago, my brother died of cancer, and what I didn't know, I found out afterwards that he donated his eyes, and it was kind of really interesting to me to think that somebody is walking around the world now with my brother's eyes. And so I just magically, shortly after, I saw that there was a poetry contest about, and the theme was transplants. I mean, there couldn't be better serendipity, I think, right? So I wrote the English version, then I translated it. I submitted it, and it won. So it was that was really very interesting story behind the poem. But I'll read the poem. It's called New Life. Northern snows assault my squinting eyes. Saucy southern rhythms heat my blood as it mambos to my heartbeat. Exotic spices from the east break their journey in my kidneys, and arid west winds parch my lungs. Meanwhile, the damp earth of my homeland cools my body in its last resting place, where they lowered it not a month ago, and my soul expands to embrace new life. So
wonderful stuff. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Anita.
beautiful.
It's
Thank
very,
you.
very moving, and the descriptions are absolutely amazing. So, Anita, you've been so kind. Thank you, firstly, for reading an excerpt from your latest book, which we will link in our description. Also, but thank you so much for reading this poem to us. And a big thank you for being here, for answering all our questions and being present with us in this interview as well. It's been a pleasure for me.
Thank you so much, Anita. It was wonderful to listen to all your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.